Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Citizens webinar, Are Your Grassroots Efforts Generating Enough Buzz? I'm Mark Riley, Vice President of Government Relations. During today's webinar, we'll discuss some keys to running an effective grassroots program that gets results. We're going to be covering a variety of issues, but a couple of things we're going to point out are going to be understanding your supporters by tracking and testing behavior, motivating your audience with compelling calls to action and shareable content, recruiting and educating your activists by engaging them online where they are, and looking to define your influencers and creating a ladder of engagement that helps you identify more influencers. Before I introduce my co-presenter, I'm Mike Panetta. I'd like to cover a few quick housekeeping points. Questions, please do ask them. There'll be a moderated Q&A. So you'll be able to enter those through the webinar. We will be providing a recording of the webinar and sending out a video link of that later on. If you would like to tweet about the webinar, and I encourage you to do so, the hashtag will be CisionWebinar, and that's one word. And now let me introduce my co-presenter, Mike Panetta. He's an award-winning public affairs campaign strategist who specializes in using the internet and social media for creative issue advocacy and grassroots activism. He's currently a partner at the Beekeeper Group. Mike and I have known each other for, I think, almost 20 years and worked together for several years at a public affairs consultancy that's no longer around. My name is Mark Riley. I'm the Vice President of Government Relations product here at Cision, and I've been here for the last decade. And without any further ado, we'll dive into the presentation. We'll be about 40 to 45 minutes, and depending on questions, we should have some time at the end for additional questions. So the first thing I'd like to do is sort of take a step back and talk about maybe an elephant in the room, which is that people really don't like Congress, and a lot of people have a very negative attitude towards grassroots or political involvement in general. Obviously, for those of us involved in grassroots and in politics, we may not see it that way, but I think we have to acknowledge, and Mike, I think you'd agree, that this is a real challenge and a hurdle for grassroots campaigns, is that a lot of people simply don't like Washington. Now, it can also be to your advantage, depending on your message and the type of campaign, but I think there's definitely a feeling of nothing gets done in Washington and the people in Washington aren't interested in doing anything, and so that may have some implications for your campaign depending on your issue. Mike, I don't know if you want to make a comment on that.
Well, you pretty much nailed it, Mark, but it's what you have to keep in mind is that this is the environment in which your issue campaign is being run in, regardless of what you're working on. The all-time low congressional approval rating, trust in government, trust in media are at all-time lows. So we sort of have a very cynical population right now. So as you're putting together your themes and messages of your campaign, I'm not saying you have to be negative or you have to go that route as well, but just keep that in mind. That a lot of the people you're going to be reaching out to sort of have the do-nothing mentality of Congress's role these days.
Right. All right, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about sort of the good stuff. But I just felt like we had to acknowledge that before we got going. Your grassroots programs, really, you should think about it as perhaps a puzzle or a toolbox. It needs to have multiple pieces, and all of those pieces need to work together and sort of piece together. And we're going to go over a number of the different things that we think are important and some of the specific tools that are used, and in some cases sort of strategies and general ideas. I'd like to take a minute and talk about how it used to be. So back in the mid-90s when grassroots, and even through to the early 2000s, grassroots worked pretty simply. You had a website, you had an email list, you emailed your list and said, take action on the website, or people found your website through the internet and they took action and those messages were sent to Congress, and if you had a more advanced tool set, you collected all of the messages that they sent and had some reports and analytics in your Grassroots database or Grassroots software program. And that was basically the model that we used not that long ago, but things have changed. Now there are so many more ways for people to find content, to take action, and to communicate directly with members of Congress other than posting to their web form or sending them an email. And while this slide is by no means comprehensive, it wants to sort of show or demonstrate that there are all these ways people communicate with Congress that are outside of the old model. People can tweet their legislators directly. They can post YouTube videos. They can post on their Facebook site. People still, in grassroots campaigns, still do rely on the old model, and it's definitely still worthwhile if you've got a large list, and people still use email. I don't want to pretend that email isn't a good way to communicate with folks, but if that's all you're doing, that's probably not going to work. I'd also note that there are a couple different channels now for grassroots websites to communicate with Congress, and that not only is there the Write Your Rep, but there's also an alternate channel. It's kind of a down-in-the-weeds technical thing, but for those of you into that, I note that as well. Mike, I don't know if you had any other comments on this before I move on.
No, in terms of what's changed, it's more you used to have a finite number of paths in and out of a congressional office, and now there's almost an infinite number of paths in and out with the different digital technologies out there. Not saying you should have to be everywhere, everything to everybody, but just know that and think of where your target audience is, where your issue lives, the people you're trying to move on an issue. Spend some time thinking strategically about where they are, then hone your messages to be on those platforms.
Yeah, and I'd note that sort of the key difference really when you think about it at a high level is in the old model, the content and the message and the process was controlled by the grassroots campaign to a very large extent. You decided who you were sending an email to, you sent those to folks, you got them to come to your website, and they took action on a message that you had crafted. And in some cases, you may have locked that message down so they couldn't even edit it. That's completely different than someone tweeting their legislator directly, where you can't control that message even if you want to. They're going to craft their own message and put their own personal stamp on it. For those of you involved in corporate grassroots, the old model actually really still holds, because most likely you're not motivating or engaging your employees or perhaps your association members through social media, because you already have their email address and it's sort of a closed circuit. You might be using Twitter and Facebook, and that may be a very good idea depending on your corporate culture, but there are a lot of corporations that still really use this old model, and it still can be effective if your universe is engaged. So if the people really want to get that message, it can still work. So taking time to build a go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Mark. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Take the time to build a grassroots program. You really have to build a program, sending out a message to your folks once every 6 months and asking them to take action. That's not a grassroots program. And it's not going to have probably very good results because you haven't really created a relationship. There's actually a white paper on this, which we'll provide a link to, that I wrote, published out on Cision.com in February or March of this year, and you can take a look at that. Mike, I know you had some comments, so go for it.
Well, yeah, the thing to think about when you're building a grassroots program is these are more than lists of followers, they're more a list of email addresses. Even we live in this digital age now, but we have to remember that these are real people, and you can build a list quickly. Doesn't mean you're building a grassroots program quickly. It takes time to do that. Obviously, you want to build a sort of a community more than a list. These people you want them to share the values and the goals of your organization, or if you're a corporation, they're working for you. But you want to get everybody on the same page in terms of what we're trying to do from a legislative, from a government relations perspective, and try to make them feel like they're part of something bigger. So that means there should always be something that they could be doing as part of the Grassroots program. There may not be an active message to Congress going on right now, but there should be always something they can do in terms of helping recruit people, helping spread the word, helping there's a variety of things we could have people do, because again they're part of. You want them to feel like they're part of something, not just a name on a spreadsheet, not just a line item that gets emailed when it's time to send out something. So make sure that you're communicating all the time, not just when you need them to do something for you.
Yeah, Mike, we've actually got a question that's come in right away, and I'd like to get to it now if that's okay. The question is in regards to ways of communicating with Congress. Is there one venue or one way that is more effective? Social media, personal visits, emails, and I guess I would say that it depends on your campaign, but definitely right now, social media has some advantages because it's a public message that everyone can see, and so members of Congress and their staff feel like they have to address them. However, it's here and it's gone. It's not enough to just do social media. I think that having personal visits, personal communications that demonstrate a level of engagement by the person sending the message always has more impact than a message that's a form letter. And people can disagree, but I think that if you have 10 people who do phone calls to the office who sound educated, that's probably worth more than 500 form emails that are all the same, that say the same thing. Both would be better, but if you have to pick one, that might be better. Mike, I don't know if you want to answer that question as well.
Yeah, I'd point people to the Congressional Management Foundation. They've done a lot of studies on this, looking at the effectiveness of those various forms of communication with offices, and it comes down to scale. Obviously, I think the in-person visits are always going to be more effective, but that's hard to scale at a large volume. So where social media and things like that are easier to scale. So I think that some of the findings they found was that the emailing into the office is still very effective because there's systems for that counts the letters that come in, count the pros, that count the cons, and they sort of report that up to the boss. And then I think the other things, the Twitter and the Facebook, are also valuable because, like as Mark said, they're public forums and people see that. Twitter especially more than Facebook, because Twitter is, you put it out there, and especially if you tag the member of Congress in your tweet, and we've ran campaigns where that's been sort of the goal, is to have that happen. It's sort of a mini 21st century letter to the editor where it's out there for everybody to see, and it tags a member of Congress, so someone in that office is seeing that as well. So I think there's different levels of engagement and different effectiveness, but the social media is definitely something that offices are paying attention to, and that data is also borne out in the study that Congressional Management Foundation has done.
Yeah, we'll have a link to that in the webinar that we send out in the recap. Yeah, there was somebody, and I don't know who it was, so I'm going to steal it because I can't remember their name, but they said, you want to think about it almost as like your communications is a song. You've got a constant drumbeat of emails coming in sort of in a constant pace, and then you want to have different instruments, different methods, different melodies come in of like, okay, we're doing a social media campaign, then we're going to do a phone call campaign, then we're going to do some personal visits, and that mix of communications is really the best. And like Mike said, you can't scale personal visits because it's just, unless you have millions and millions of dollars, you're not going to be able to get enough people to show up. So I agree with everything you said, and I think that's the right answer. All right, we'll move on.
Let's move on to the next slide. So we talked about, it takes time to build a program, and I talked about how these are actual people on your list. And one of the things I always tell our clients in the campaigns we work on is, to find out ways to know who your supporters are. Again, you don't want them to be just names on a list. What are the kind of things that they care about? What are they doing as part of your program on your website? Are you collecting the sort of data points to sort of round out the information of who these people are? So John Doe, is John Doe married? Is he single? Is he young? Is he older? Is he blue collar? Is he professional? What issues does he care about? What things is he taking action on the website? What issues is he showing an affinity for? All the things that as people touch your campaign, you should be collecting data along the way, so you're building out a much more robust profile of these people. So, and that's very important as you get into your messaging, because it'll allow you to do things like segment your messaging, so you're not talking. So you have a database of 100,000 people. There's not 100,000 exactly the same person. They're different people in different stages of life with different backgrounds, and the more you know about them, the more you can tailor your messages to those different audiences and tailor your asks to be more to resonate more with what they're who they are and what they're about. And there's different ways to do that. Moving on to the next slide, we talk about passive supporter tracking, and this is the sort of thing where people are just interacting with your website, with your digital campaign, and they're telling you things without proactively really telling you things. They're telling you things by opening emails, by clicking on emails, by clicking on specific links within the email, visiting the website, what pages are they going to, what actions are they doing. These are the sort of things that are just sort of being tracked by the the analytics on the back end, and this allows you to sort of get an idea of what issues and what messages are driving people just based on looking at the statistics. Do you want to add anything here, Mark, before we go on to the next one?
The only thing I'd add is that Google Analytics is probably the dominant analytic package here. It's free, and because a lot of your search engine optimization is going to come from Google anyways, and most of your traffic's going to come from Google, that it makes sense to use that package, and this screenshot is in fact from that package. So that would be my suggestion just from a nuts and bolts perspective.
And then moving on to the more active supporter tracking, and this is where you can actually ask people things. And we have a couple screenshots here and some logos of things. Like we've done surveys. There's a tool called Wrap Index that can go through your entire database and sort of map out their relations to other people. I mean, sometimes it's as easy as just asking people to fill out a survey. Asking people what they care about, asking people more information about themselves. And you can find out, just filling out the survey is a good data point of people who are active and want to tell you more. And then the things that they tell you as well. Again, this helps build a richer profile of who these people are. So when you're building your grassroots network, it's not just names on a list. It's actual individuals who have real issues that they care about, and they're actually letting you know what that is, what they are. Jump to the next slide.
Yeah, I'd note on that with surveys also, your good point is that people filling out the survey tells you something about them, right? The people that took the time to fill out the survey, by sending out a list to 1,000 people and only 300 took the survey, those 300 people you should be paying attention to. You should be listening to them because those people are more engaged and are more likely to be influencers and are more likely to be your champions. And so I think doing surveys is actually, one of those activities you can do when there's nothing going on at the Hill and your issue really isn't in the media and nothing's going on. That's a perfect time to send out a survey, and over a 6-8 week period, you could send a couple emails reminding people to take the survey, releasing some interesting results from the survey. So there's a lot of ways you can sort of keep your campaign in their mind, even though there's really nothing going on, and you're still learning stuff at the same time. Mike, did you want me to talk about this next slide? Mike, you're still there? Anyways, I will talk.
I am here, yes. I'm sorry. I had an ambulance coming down the street. I wanted to be a little quieter. I was saying, yes, why don't you jump in on us quickly, and then let's keep moving.
Yeah, so the next slide is really looking at, once you collect this data, you need to have a database or some sort of systems that you can track and leverage the data. This slide, happens to be our Cision Government Relations product. And basically, it's allowing you to look and say, okay, I want to target people based on district matching, which clearly you would need to have, committee assignments of their legislators, whether they've been identified as an influencer, and so on. And so the point here is you need, if you're going to collect data you need to have a place to store it, track it, and leverage it. And there are a lot of systems out there, like our product, that do that.
So once we sort of start building up our profile, we talked about going from names on a list to sort of getting more a robust data profile on these people, who they are. You're starting to figure out what works with your supporters, and you want to you put the messages in front of them that's going to work. So knowing who these people are is key because, as I said before, it allows you to refine messages. So a big part of that is testing your messages. So we're big fans of doing what we call A/B testing, where you can have different messages that have a slightly different, say, different subject line, different opening paragraph, or lead with different themes, and then send one message to about, say 10% of your list, another message to another 10% of your list, and then sit back and see which ones are getting the greater response, which ones are having the greater open rates, click-through rates, et cetera, and then you're able to, and then take those findings and apply it to the rest of the list, the 80% of the list. And again, it's not just that you want to be not just doing your entire list. You want to be looking at what these people have told you in the past, and perhaps have different audiences for the different issue areas, and have people who care about issue A get one set of messages, people who care about issue B get a second set of messages. So again, we're trying to move into a grassroots program that's more geared towards the individual at the end of the communication chain, whether that's email or social media or whatever we're putting out there, than a one-size-fits-all approach for everybody. So knowing who these people are, sending out messages, testing different messages, seeing what resonates. It should be, we like to advise clients that you're never done with that sort of work. It's a constant cycle of sending, testing, learning, and refining your messages to drive up. The ultimate goal, obviously, is to move people to take some sort of action to a decision maker. But before that happens, they have to be, opening your emails, reading your emails, resonating, identifying with your calls to action, and actually doing something. So all this sort of testing and refinement is at the end with the end goal in mind, is to drive up those action rates. And then we talk about reaching supporters where they are. It used to be like when Mark screened a few screens back talking about how it used to be. It used to be that there's really just a single point of contact with somebody electronically. It was their email address, and that generally was in front of one computer that they used. And now there's just been an explosion of this stuff. It's no longer a single screen environment. People have their tablets, their laptops, their phones, their computers at work, their computers at home. There's multiple devices. There's multiple venues, so they're using all sorts of venues to communicate and be online. People are spending time on any dozen of online venues, social media platforms that we know about, and then there's just all the niche things that people are doing online in terms of gaming, watching Netflix, all these things. So you can't assume your target audience is using the primary channels that you think they're using. So you can't assume that you can pick a couple of platforms and be that and that's it. You can't assume that I guess the biggest thing I'm trying to say here is you can't assume that you're your target audience. Just because you're not on a platform doesn't mean a lot of your target audience is. And again, this goes back to trying to find out where your supporters, where they are and what they're doing. And this is one of those things that you could probably do with one of those surveys. But you have to have a strategy that puts your key messages, which really shouldn't change. Your key messages, your key call to action, the themes of what you're trying to do remain constant across all these different platforms. But you have to think of a way to put this in front of as many screens as possible. Anything you want to add there, Mark? I want to move on to the next slide here.
Yeah, I think basically, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Mark, sorry.
Yeah, I think basically, in this day and age, I don't know what the statistics are, but you can assume that somewhere between 20 and 40% of the folks who are accessing your content or accessing your website are doing so on a mobile device. So it's important that it be mobile optimized. This slide sort of talks to responsive design versus mobile optimized, and I think that, Mike, where do you come down on the responsive design versus mobile optimized question?
Well, when we work with clients, we design almost everything now responsive design. Like a mobile optimized for us, that means that it's going to look okay on whatever screen you're looking at. It's not going to be a different design, which a responsive design would do. So when we design a responsive site, for example, going from a laptop to a mobile device to like your iPhone, it's going to have a completely different layout that is optimized for that device. It's not just taking the existing site and shrinking it down, which is better than some sites do, which don't do that at all. But we work with responsive design because that allows you to really take advantage of the screen size and make your design more friendly for whatever you're looking at. So you're designing specifically with an iPad in mind. You're designing specifically with an iPhone in mind, or a mobile or whatever mobile device it is, which makes it, again, which goes back to making it easier to get people to do what you want them to do, to learn what you want them to learn, and take the action on what you want them to take action on. So it's also very important these days because Google is pinging sites for not doing this. So if your site's not responsive or mobile optimized, it is going to be at a disadvantage in the search rankings because Google knows that so many of their searches are happening on mobile phones, mobile devices, that the content that they're going to serve back, they want to make sure it's optimized for those devices. So if you're not optimized, if you're not responsive design, if you don't have a mobile strategy in place for your content, you're going to be seriously dinged on the Google search results. So talking a little bit about campaigns and social media, obviously Facebook's a huge component of this. We won't get too into the details on Facebook because I feel like there's webinar after webinar about using Facebook, but the key things you need to know is if you look at your site traffic, I would venture money that the top 3 referrals to your website or your campaign, wherever it lives, is going to be from Facebook. That is a huge driver for all the campaigns we work on. Facebook is a huge driver of traffic. We do advertisements on Facebook, which is very effective, and you can be very targeted with that, but also just the organic sharing of links and content on Facebook. So it's important that you have a presence there, obviously, because that is going to help drive traffic back to what you want people to do. And it's also where a lot of your issue is being discussed, whether you know it or not. So having a presence on that site, a Facebook page or a Facebook page, is key to do this. Like I said, I don't want to get too into the details on this because you can do a whole webinar on this sort of thing. So I don't know if I'm telling you anything you don't know here, but it's definitely worthwhile having your content on Facebook for no other reason than it's going to drive traffic back to what you want people to actually do. Anything there, Mark, before we move on to
No, I was just going to, and I'm sort of anticipating the next slide, which is about Twitter. To me, these two, and I'm going to go against what you said earlier, which is the way I use Facebook and the way I use Twitter. So to me, that Facebook content seems more like my close friends, my personal friends, and sort of I do push out things on Facebook that are stories and stuff I'm interested in. Twitter's more of a public persona, and so maybe you could, Mike, talk about how the differences in the content that you might want to put on Twitter versus Facebook, or is there really any difference?
Yeah, I think a good thing to think about is if you look between those two programs, and Mark, you are right there. It is Facebook's much more of the audience that you build, much more of your friends. But obviously what we're trying to do is get our campaign in front of as many people as possible. So having a Facebook presence where you're able to share, having native content on Facebook, like you say, if you have a Facebook page, you have your post, you have your message, the key components of your campaign are replicated as Facebook posts on the page of that campaign. That becomes Facebook native content that can then be shared throughout the platform. But again, like you said, Mark, it is a much more personal environment, whereas Twitter is much more public. If you think about one note I made to myself as I was thinking through this webinar is Twitter is where all the campaign wars are happening right now. If you think of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, for example, they're engaging each other across Twitter because they know that is the public platform that everybody can see, everybody has access to. And the one thing that we like about it for our campaigns is well, it's not more than one thing. It's several things. One is it's real time. So you log into Facebook and you'll see posts that are sort of an algorithm that puts that together. There's no algorithm here on Twitter, at least right now. It's a real time stream, so you can see what's going on in real time with an organization, or more importantly, with a campaign or an event with a hashtag. Twitter is a great place that aggregates all those discussions. So in terms of an advocacy component, an advocacy side of this is looking at what hashtags are being used for the events or for the issues that you're working on, and making sure you're incorporating those into whatever content you're putting out there, because then you're part of a larger conversation. You're sort of jumping on the bandwagon of a larger but relevant conversation by using the appropriate hashtags for what is being discussed online around your issue. And you want to drive people back to some sort of action. So it's not just getting on Twitter for fun and just because it's a cool social media thing to do. You want to use that to leverage people to come back to your site, to register, to take action, to then become part of your Grassroots network. And then you can, again, like I said earlier, start that process of bringing them in, learning more about them, and getting them down a ladder of engagement, which we'll talk about later. I'm going to jump ahead to, unless there's anything else there, jump ahead to some of the other social networks. I hit the wrong button.
Go for it.
There we go. So I have a little quote at the bottom there. Just because you aren't on it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So that's one thing to keep in mind, especially as these new platforms take off. So many of you are like, well, I'm already on Facebook and Twitter, and I'm on LinkedIn. I think that's enough. And it may be enough for you, but you have to understand that you're not your target audience, and there's other networks out there that people are using to communicate with others, to spread the word about messages, to share their thoughts and feelings about issues. And it's a whole conversation that's going on that you may not even know exists. I'm not saying you have to jump in and be part of everything, but you have to know they exist. So a couple notes here is, one is for us, we're seeing a lot more engagement on Snapchat these days, especially with younger people. And it's a little different than the other net platforms because it's really hard to just jump in or even track what's going on. It's built in such a way that things don't stay around for a long time. They disappear after 24 hours. But there are ways that you can take advantage of that. For example, we're starting to experiment more with, I don't know how many are familiar with this, but Snapchat allows you to put custom filters over the snaps, the posts that people put. So you take a picture or a video, and before you post it, there's custom overlays that you can scroll through and put that on. And we've worked with clients who have created their own custom overlays for an event, for a conference, for a Hill Day. So it's an additional bit of branding that can be automatically added to Snapchat content that's created within a specific geographic area over a defined period of time. So it's one of those things that it's primarily a younger audience, but it's growing rapidly. I would say it's sort of Facebook was before it really took off. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And just providing content and providing tools that allow people who do use that platform to help you spread your message. And again, it's very event driven because these custom overlays are for a specific amount of time and in a very specific geographic area that you sort of literally draw out on a map, that I want my custom filter to be in this geographic area from this day to this day. Excuse me. So that is definitely something we're keeping an eye on. And then we're also seeing a lot more a lot more advocacy use of LinkedIn, especially within the groups. LinkedIn is one of those places where people are self-organized into professional societies, professional groups. So getting it's sort of that those networks are already exist, And it makes it easier as our job as advocacy professionals to tap into that, try to make contact or set up a relationship with the leader of those groups as a conduit to the larger group. It doesn't make sense just to jump in and drop your advocacy platforms. It's more of a networking play where you find out the people who are sort of the gateway to the larger groups of the people you're trying to reach. And obviously Instagram is something we're seeing a lot more use of as well. Very targeted use of Instagram amongst younger people. And again, this is something that's being done at events and driving the visual representation of an issue to drive people towards action.
Mike, a couple questions came in while we
Sure.
were talking. I'll sort of condense them into one question. Between Facebook ads and Twitter ads, and then now that Snapchat is allowing ads as well, do you have a preference, or do you feel like one is better for a particular use case versus another?
That is a good question. We've used both, and I would say I am a bigger fan of Facebook ads than Twitter ads. I feel like the amount of targeting you can do, I think, is a little more granular. I think it's a little more cost effective as well. I feel like Facebook is more of a destination for a larger percentage of the people that our campaigns are trying to reach than Twitter. I think Twitter is good for a very focused sort of day of event, or very focused around a particular hashtag. You can run ads against that, but I feel like you get more of a long-term return on your investment with a Facebook campaign, because you're getting people to try to do something, to try to take action, to try to follow you on Facebook. You can drive people to your website. So I feel like you get more of a, like I said, a return on that investment, because you're able to do something with those people later. Where Twitter, I feel like it's just more of driving people to your Twitter page, and hopefully they'll follow you. I don't think you get as much return on that investment. That's just my experience with the campaigns I've run. I'm sure other people may have different experiences, but that's where I am on that. And then what was the question? I'm sorry, the Snapchat side of that question, Mark? Ads
on Snapchat. What do you think about ads? Now that Snapchat's allowing ads, what do you think of that, or is it too soon to tell?
I think it's very interesting. I don't have experience running ads on that yet. It's relatively new, and they don't have a sort of a self-service platform yet, because a lot of the campaigns we work with, they're not spending tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars like the Bud Light ads you would see on a Snapchat. They're much more focused and targeted, so I don't think Snapchat has that level of self-service, smaller budget ads yet. But when they do, I think it'll be extremely powerful tool.
And Mike, I just wanted to bring up something that you had mentioned to me with Snapchat. If I got this correctly, you were saying that you could do it around a geographical area. And correct me if I'm wrong, you said that your company had done a filter for around the Capitol for a Hill Day.
Yeah, we worked with a client to do that, and the way it works is you create an overlay that you upload, and then you go to they literally pull up a Google map, and you draw a line on the Google map of where would you like this filter to be available to Snapchat users, and then you put a timestamp on that, and then you pay. You basically, the cost is how large of the geographic area you're targeting and how long you're going to do it. So we've done it for Capitol Hill, and we've done it for small events like in our office and other small events. So the costs vary. On the Hill, it could be as much as $400 or $500 a day, depending on how big you draw the lines. And then it's for a small event in an office, it could be $20. So it really depends on how long and how big the geographic area is.
Cool. All right.
So moving on, quick note on millennials. We get this question a lot. Is this stuff really just for younger people? And the thing that I always want to note about millennials is that they're just young. That's really the big difference, I think, between them and a lot of other generations. Is that as a Gen Xer, a lot of the stereotypes that get put on this generation were also put on our generation of being, slackers and not interested and aloof and things like that. So, but the thing that's different, exactly, yeah, but the two things that are different is that they grew up with this technology. So, it's sort of their native default setting is to use digital technology to communicate with their friends and to communicate with government officials and just to communicate in general. So having your materials in that format is crucial, also because millennials have just become the largest segment of the American population. So as opposed to the Gen X before it, we were sort of a dip in the population. There is a massive amount of millennials, and they are now outpaced the baby boomers as the largest percentage of the population, which is going to just drive more of this digital engagement. So not having this sort of content that's available on these platforms is going to do you a big disservice. So that means that we have to get into things that are share-worthy, and that's a big part of what we're talking about next. Is the content that you're putting out there, you have to realize that you are in competition with everything else that's online these days. So your action alerts, your call to actions, your newsletters for your organization are being read on the same screen as Netflix and email and video games and Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat. You are up against all of that. So if your content is dry and boring and text heavy, it's going to be scrolled right past. So you have to create things that we call share-worthy, things that sort of spark emotion, that tug at a heartstring, make you laugh, that are essentially worthy of being shared. If you look at some of the things that are out there, I don't know how many of you are on BuzzFeed, and I put this out there because I thought it was just a ridiculous headline, but BuzzFeed, as an example, is a media entity that sort of has cracked the code a little bit on this. They do things that are easy. They're easy reads. They're light reads. They're digestible. There's a lot of list formats, and they're created in such a way that they appeal to a very niche audience that begs it to be shared with other people. I don't know how many of you have gotten things in your social media feeds from BuzzFeed, top 10 things about insert university that you did not know. And then everyone from that university will share with everybody else from the one to that same university, or top 10 things that only an Italian American who was raised in New Jersey knows about dating. And that's exactly will be shared with that audience. So I'm not saying you have to go down that road, but keep this in mind as you develop content, that people look for the easy reads, the things that appeal to a niche audience, and those are the sort of things that help you get shared. So I'm not saying you need to have 18 cats who are pumped for your next issue campaign, but there are ways to develop lists or similar sort of formatted content that do appeal to exactly your target audience, that would then have that be shared with others. For example, we work with like a medical specialty group, for example, 25 things that only a medical student would know about X. And then that's the kind of thing that medical students, for example, would share with other medical students. And at the end of that, you have some sort of call to action. So I bring this up as sort of a not to exactly follow this, but this is a group that sort of has cracked the code a little bit on how the new media platforms work and how people are wired to shared things. So it's worth bringing up. So that's the kind of material that gets shared, not this kind of stuff. What I tell my clients is nobody shares fact sheets and nobody shares press releases. So if you're putting out things like this on your social media channels, if you're putting these sort of emails out, I would not be surprised if you did not get a lot of engagement or a lot of action on that. Just your plain text, fact sheets, emails, newsletters, things like that.
And I'd note that for those of you in perhaps in a corporate environment or a professional association environment who may be thinking to themselves, that's great, BuzzFeed, 18 cats. I can't do that inside my corporation because people will, just mock me and laugh, and that's not serious enough. I think there's some truth to that thought, but I think the reality is that if you can't create compelling content that sparks some sort of emotion, and potentially humor is okay, people aren't going to react to your content. And I can tell you just from being within Cision, which is a corporation, that the web emails that come out that have some fun in them or that are interesting get a lot more comment and circulation between folks than the stuff that's dry. And I think, the point that Mike's making is really true. No matter what environment you're in, you need to think about this needs to be short, it needs to be sweet, it needs to spark emotion, it needs to grab attention, and it doesn't matter. Even if your issue is a serious issue, you still need to think about that. You can't put out long-winded fact sheets that were written by the lobbyist or your legal department, because nobody's going to read those but the 5 or 6 people involved professionally in the organization for that campaign.
Definitely.
So I'll get off my soapbox now.
One example here is the next slide here is something that we worked on with the American Heart Association. We worked with them on a campaign on reauthorizing the school lunch program. And again, it's the kind of thing where there's a lot of fact sheets and there's a lot of statistics about percentage of students who are getting vegetables and childhood obesity, and that's all well and good. But what they did is they worked with Funny or Die to produce a video, and there's a link to it down on the screen here, and we'll share that afterwards. And it uses Nick Offerman from TV's Parks and Recreation. And the gist of the video is it's all about farm fresh, but it's a pizza farm. So they grow pizzas, they harvest sloppy joes, they water it with soda, they pull taquitos off the trees, and it's sort of a spoof on the farm to table sort of movement from the perspective of like the pizza industry. And in the end of it, obviously the whole idea here is to get people to laugh and to share this, but the goal of the core message here is that Congress needs to act to reauthorize healthy school lunches, or this is the kind of stuff that's going to wind up on our kids' plates. So it was a serious issue, but they took a very humorous approach with it, and it was it was their most shared video ever, I believe. And it drove people back to the website to take action. So it was the kind of thing like, you see this, it's hilarious, you want to share it with your friends, as opposed to a fact sheet, which you would not want to do.
Yeah, I watched it. It's great. And, initially you're almost like, hey, wait, I don't know what's going on here. Pizza growing on trees? Like, what is this? And then you sort of get inside the joke, and it is very effective. It's worth the 3 minutes of your life to watch that video.
And then moving on to another thing that we do a lot of is interactive quizzes, and I pulled this sort of screen grab from I believe a BuzzFeed site, like what city should you actually live in. I'm sure you guys get these all the time on your social feed, because it's the sort of thing that people love to share. What character from Twilight are you? But we incorporate those into sort of our action components to ask people quizzes and give people results. People love to take quizzes. People love to take surveys. Quizzes, especially that have something at the end that's sort of a reward for taking it, like finding out what percentage they are compared to X, Y, and Z, or what level of commitment they have to an issue, or how much they know about something. So these interactive quizzes, these are the kind of things that A, people like to do, B, people like to share, and C, add data to your profiles of your grassroots individuals. So coming up with something that's creative and fun with those questions, but also keep in mind that at the end of the day, what you want to do is drive engagement, have people spend more time with your organization by filling out these surveys or these quizzes, but also the answers should go into their profile, so then you can use that as another touch point for segmentation and for reaching out with specific messages. And another thing we do a lot of is infographics, and they're a great way to get information in front of people using in a graphical format, which is probably why they call them infographics. But we've talked with the Washington team of Twitter, and they've told us that in a public policy space, in an advocacy space, infographics are the number one thing that get retweeted. So they are definitely shareable content. So all the things we're looking at here, I did one sort of funny one and then one of a more serious one. But these are the kind of things that could easily be dry fact sheets. And a lot of the infographics we've done for clients actually start out that way. They're just fact sheets, and we say, you know what, there's a better way to do this. Let's work with you. And we come up with a graphic design, come up with a way to tell a story, and that's so much of what we're trying to do with these facts. Is there's a story behind every fact sheet. There's a story behind every sort of set of data, but it's not visual. It's not compelling. So we try to work with clients to find the story that's hidden in those numbers or hidden in those facts. And infographics are a great way to bring that out. So we did one. There's one on the right-hand side. It's about rare diseases, and this is just a subset of the larger infographic. But it tells a story, sort of visually tells a story of sort of somebody who's affected with a rare disease and the struggles they go through, and it's kind of worked through some of the things that are underway to help mitigate that. And that easily could have just been a press release about it or a fact sheet, but working in a graphical format it's sort of the kind of thing that works well to be shared across those social networks. And then the last thing I'm going to touch on, and I'm going to turn it back over to Mark, is talking about live video. I don't know how many of you have experimented with things like Periscope or Facebook Live, but we're seeing a lot more groups use this to sort of bring a behind-the-scenes element to their grassroots program, especially groups that are based here in Washington to their grassroots. Now, obviously, those of us who live and work in Washington or in public affairs in general get a little jaded about sort of the sausage-making process of legislation and policy. But the people outside of D.C., that stuff can be very compelling, and sometimes just bringing a behind-the-scenes look as you're walking down, say, the halls of the Capitol on your way to a meeting, or from a staff meeting to talk about an issue, just to do a quick update saying, hey, it's me, I'm the head of Grassroots here at XYZ Association. We're about to do something here in D.C. We'd love to get your feedback, comment below, or send me a tweet. And just a few minutes of live video, I think, really brings home the fact that you're in D.C., you're working on these issues for your target audience, and you're sort of lifting the curtain and letting them behind for a little bit to show them how things work and what's going on. So we're seeing it used in that scenario. We're also seeing it used at conferences for some of our clients that attend conferences or put on their own conferences to sort of do wrap-ups of panels or interview speakers afterwards for people who couldn't be there. Sort of that live video component of it is really compelling. We've experimented with Twitter's Periscope and with Facebook Live's platform as well, and we're really seeing that tool's really evolving. We're really excited about using that. So I wanted to end what I wanted to talk about of different ways to sort of generate buzz with your campaigns by talking about this, because I'm really excited about it. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mark, who's going to go through some of the last slides here, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to touch on was media relations. A lot of times in the grassroots environment, we forget that the media and getting coverage of your issue can be extremely useful in generating buzz, in getting more supporters, and getting noticed. But the key thing to remember now is that just sending out a press release to a member of the press, traditional press, really probably isn't going to do it. And that, sort of this cartoon speaks to, you need to look at the media differently. You need to think about, who are the folks talking about my issue? Maybe they're a blogger on this issue. Maybe they're just somebody who tweets about this issue a lot. In order to find those people, that means you need to have some tools and do some research to figure out who is talking about your issue, and talking about your issue in a way that is akin and analogous to the way you talk about the issue. There may be people who support your issue who you may not actually want to highlight. But there are probably some people out there who talk about your issue, and that it's worth feeding them content because they're going to get it out to their audience quickly. And they may feel like, because you're a national organization and you're giving them content, you're elevating their status a little bit, you're getting a little bit of a relationship going with them. So I would say, while in grassroots we tend to not think about media relations. We tend to avoid it. It is worth reaching out to those folks because they are influencers, which is really the next slide that I'm going to go into, which is in order to identify influencers, you need to have some level of engagement segmentation, which is a fancy word for saying, or a fancy phrase for saying, how do you take somebody from simply inputting their email, perhaps to sign up for a newsletter, to showing up to an actual event with their own sign or with a sign you made for them. And I sort of like this cartoon of I'm so angry I made a sign. Because it shows a level of commitment and a demonstrated level of commitment for people to actually show up in the real world that is not there by simply clicking a button on a PC. And that's something to keep in mind, because if you don't have a plan that says, all right, I've got this group of people, they've just given me their email address. They're at the bottom. All right, this group of people have taken a grassroots action, so I have their email, I have their name, and I have their home address, or at least an address they're saying is their home, and so on up the ladder. And your ladder could be different from the ladder that I've proposed here. That's not the point. The point is that you need to have a plan and you need to have a ladder where you're taking people at the beginning of your funnel, getting a very low level of engagement, and moving them up slowly. Some will move on their own. Some may come in at the top. But you want to start to think about how you're pushing those people up, because the more people you can get, and this harkens back to the first question we had of what's the most impactful form of communication, and both Mike and I said, well, really, you need all of them, but personal visits are always great, and personal phone calls are always great. That's a level of a commitment that a lot of people aren't willing to give. And you're going to need to work them and have a plan to move people up to that place and identify who they are, so that they will respond to your call when you say, look, what I need you to do is to call your member of Congress or this member of Congress today or tomorrow, that you'll have some sense that they'll actually do it, and that you're comfortable that they are educated enough, they've been around your campaign and involved long enough that they'll deliver the right message in an appropriate way, because you're not going to be able to control that message. Mike, do you have anything to add on the level of engagement?
Well, it's always, the thing about level of engagement is you always want to make sure that you have an ask to take someone to the next level. They may not get there, but you always need to have something for them to do. You don't want to ask the person who's at the top of the engagement ladder to only do the things at the bottom. You want to
and in order to do that, and in order to do what Mike just said, you need to be able to have a database that can track what they've done and segment it in a way where you can sort it out, so that you're not asking people who've shown up for the, your latest event to do something that only to sign up for a newsletter, right? Because they've already done it. So it requires also some tool sets. One last thing I'd like to note is, finding out who your influencers are. And this screenshot just shows a picture of my profile in my demo government relations system here at Cision about the people that I know. And so it shows that I used to know former Congressman John Dingell, and then that I know the Governor Snyder of Michigan. And finding out who your supporters know, which legislators they know, and then sort of figuring out, do they really know them or not, is sort of half science, half art, but is a very valuable exercise, and one that will help you identify your influencers and then be able to leverage them. Last item I'm going to talk to, and there's a question coming in which I'll address in a second. Real world events still work. Getting people together in a real world environment where they interact with each other still works. And if your ultimate goal is to change a piece of legislation or to introduce a piece of legislation, members of Congress, if they go back to their district, a perfect place is to have your influencers, your supporters, meet them in their district and talk to them. It sounds very old school and charming, but it's effective. And getting your members together for a Hill Day or an event, or even just sort of so that they realize there are other people like them out there will energize them. And I think an interesting thing is that real-world activity can actually drive online activity. So while we used to, I've been talking about online activity driving people to a real-world event, real-world events can also then increase your Twitter traffic, increase posts on Facebook, which will then gain you more supporters online. So it actually works both ways. Mike, we'll wrap it up here, so I wanted to give you one last chance if you wanted to mention anything about real-world events, and then I've got a couple housekeeping items.
No, just the last thing on real-world events is that, obviously we talked a lot about digital stuff, but most of what happens online, most of what happens on Capitol Hill is real world. So don't discount that at all. Don't confuse clicking a link with being an effective advocate, because showing up is a big part of it as well, and use these tools to help drive that.
All right, well, I appreciate you listening for the last hour to our webinar. Just to recap, we will be sending out this deck to the attendees who signed up for the event, and then it will also include a list of links, which I'll just show you briefly on some of the things that we mentioned. I'd like to thank you, Mike, for your time and your insights. It was very useful. And we'll also be, if you want to look at our Cision.com for any of the white papers or blog posts that have been put up, I invite you to do that, and you can find us on Facebook and Twitter. And thank you again for joining us.